Good afternoon and welcome to the People's Verdict. Well, today we are discussing the role of civil society organizations in the management of the Constituency Development Fund, CDF. This program is brought to you by the Alliance for Community Action under the TVC list dubbed Ask CDF. And looking at the Constituency Development Fund, CDF is designed to meet the developmental needs of citizens. The success of CDF is dependent upon inclusive process of consultation which fosters cooperation among constituencies, MPs, technocrats, and the experts. The success also requires input from the local citizens and the civil society organizations at all steps in the decision making on CDF. In 2021, the government increased the CDF allocation from 1.6 to 25.7 million kwacha under the 2022 national budget and expanded its scope. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we are discussing, as I earlier alluded, the role of civil society organizations in the management of the Constituency Development Fund, CDF. And my guest on the program is Isaac Mwaipopo, who is going to help me discuss various issues. He is coming from the Center for Trade Policy and Development. I'm Patrick Soko. Mr. Mwaipopo, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, and good evening to the listeners that are tuned in, be it on Facebook and those that might be watching from the comfort of their homes.
Interesting. Mr. Mwaipopo is not a new name, especially in the civil society movement. You've been talking about various issues pertaining to policies, and we have engaged on a number of issues, but today our focus is particularly on the issue of the Constituency Development Fund, CDF, which was more prominent, especially in the 2022 national budget. So let's also start by asking this question, Mr. Mwaipopo. What is the role of civil society organizations in the utilization, implementation, and accountability of CDF?
Well, there are quite a number of roles that the civil society organizations are playing with regards to the implementation of the Constituency Development Fund. Number one, the civil society organizations are supposed to create platforms for exchange of information involving the local community as well as the duty bearers. These platforms are very significant in the process of helping the community to get to understand how much is in their constituency, how those resources are supposed to be utilized. The second function for the civil society organizations when it comes to CDF is speaking to the process of reading through to understand the guidelines that govern the implementation of the Constituency Development Fund. You remember very well, Mr. Soko, that the guidelines related to the implementation of CDF were revised more recently.
Exactly.
Part of those measures to revise the guidelines, it was to accommodate some of the new functions that the CDF will come with. But it's not all the citizens that are aware in terms of the new provisions of CDF, the requirements if a particular constituency is to ensure that the projects that they want to implement are authorized. So the civil society come in handy to simplify the guidelines, make them available to the constituency, help the country to understand. There's also another significant aspect from the civil society, which is in line with the program that we are having this evening, and that function is to ask questions.
Exactly.
You need to ask questions in terms of how the money is being used. You've seen lately in the media that there were publications indicating that about 156 land cruisers will be bought using CDF funds. So civil society organizations will pick such and begin to interrogate if at all the procurement of those vehicles is being done in line with the given guidelines. And they would also have to check if at all it is just an allegation or there are some facts related to plans to procure such things. So those are some of the key functions or roles that civil society organizations are playing around the CDF.
But what has been your observation on the CDF processes, management and implementation in the districts where you are working?
Well, a number of communities do not fully understand in terms of the changes that have happened related to CDF. First of all, if you remember very well, the allocation towards constituencies was around 1.6 million.
Exactly.
But in the 2022 national budget, there was an increase in terms of allocation towards a CDF, which came to somewhere around 25 million. That in itself is a huge increase that needed a lot of sensitization for the community so that they can get to understand that within their locations there are some resources that have been allocated to advance their interest. So most of these communities have often lived under the assumption that CDF is just the same. Even when you just hear about the huge allocation, most of them have actually had doubts. I deliberately even took a trip at some point and went to the Copper Belt at the gesture or kindness of the Member of Parliament for Ankana, Honorable Bino Mpundu. He invited me to his constituency when he was engaging his constituency members with regards to some of their planned activities related to CDF. You could see that some of the questions the general members of the community were asking are questions that demonstrated that the understanding in terms of how monies for CDF is supposed to be used was quite limited. Others were even thinking that it's money that they can just access, maybe share, and there's no need to actually waste time in terms of developing concept notes or proposals in terms of activities that they would want to do. So those are some of the key observations. But other than that, we've also seen some delays in the actual approvals for activities or projects that constituencies have come up with. Some of the members of parliament have spent a lot of their time coming through to Lusaka to engage the Ministry of Local Government here to try and get approvals for activities that they had proposed to do. This is also at the backdrop of activities that were previously not done under CDF for other years beyond 2022 as well. So those are some of the observations that we have seen in some of these constituencies.
Interesting. Well, our dear viewers, in case you're just joining us, you are watching the Ask CDF program brought to you by the Alliance for Community Action. And in the studio, I'm with the Center for Trade Policy and Development Executive Director, Mr. Isaac Mwaipopo, to help me discuss the role of civil society organization, especially when it comes to pertaining matters on CDF. And just now, going forward, Mr. Mwaipopo, is there any record of CDF improving overall the economy of the country, or what does the country look like?
Well, the constituency development funds are very important in the sense that these are resources that give a good opportunity for people within their locations to get to directly participate in making decisions with regards to development priorities within their constituencies. In Zambia, we have about 150 constituencies. And from those 150 constituencies, imagine that each constituency is receiving 25 million. That's quite a decent amount compared to what most of these constituencies were receiving. And it gives them an opportunity to undertake development activities that previously would have been very difficult to do. So some of the projects that we have seen through observations in terms of monitoring pages for most of the members of parliament around the country have included projects that are speaking to the setup of school blocks. This is very critical in terms of advancing opportunities for young people to education. We've seen in some of the constituencies they're undertaking construction projects for clinics. We've also seen that in some of the constituencies they've actually provided resources to women entrepreneurs. So some of those are positives that ultimately would contribute towards stimulating economic activities, creating job opportunities in the local communities, and it would ultimately contribute towards rolling back poverty and inequality. But We are yet to get to a point of even undertaking a detailed assessment on the impact that CDF has had on development, and it would be very important that one is undertaken so that the numbers can be very clear in terms of how the communities are benefiting, what the challenges are. After documenting the challenges, some proposed recommendations for reform can be generated equally.
Mr. Mwepopo, I also want to ask you this question that I've begun to ask on CDF. Does it mean that government, as through the central government, has suspended its responsibility to finance activities in these constituencies and relegated everything under CDF? Because whichever, when people ask for development, they say, you have the CDF,
Yep.
use the CDF for empowerment,
Yep.
use the CDF for the construction of schools and health centers.
Yep.
Does that mean so? But if that's the case, then is that really increasing CDF, or is it serving its purpose?
Well, I agree with you that we have seen an expansion in terms of functions for CDF. Part of the resources are earmarked to provide, let's say, tuition fees for young people that are in boarding schools. We've also seen that part of the resources are going towards the building of skills through trainings in most of these trade schools. But we've also seen that part of CDF is also earmarked for empowerment as well as construction of projects. In our view, at the Center for Trade Policy and Development, we think that it is a good move to ensure that resources are taken to the local communities and decisions are being made locally in terms of priorities. Let's face it, in many cases, central government has failed lamentably to provide the needs for most of the communities. It has largely been promises after promises. You heard at some point we're hearing of the construction of 650 health posts. In most of these rural areas when we travel, we hardly see the 650 health posts. So to avoid a situation where we keep on promising and the rhetoric when it comes to development, it would be very important that the communities are empowered with the resources and they get to decide on how they use those resources. Though we remain very concerned with some of the bottlenecks that we have observed. Our understanding is that through CDF, government was also going to undertake some reforms that would ensure that the approval process is equally decentralized. But what we have now is that there is still a heavy involvement of the central government in terms of approving most of those activities. That in itself has got the potential to impact negatively on CDF meeting most of the intended benefits. So our recommendation is that the central government should be courageous enough to undertake reforms that would ensure that the decision making and approval on the implementation of CDF is decentralized. Things should be done at the provincial level. We should allow the leadership within the province to get to approve the implementation of activities and also decentralize certain offices that are working towards ensuring that there's accountability and transparency, be it the Anti-Corruption Commission, be it the Auditor General's Office, so that they should have presence in most of these provinces. And we just do away with this notion that if you want to have access to resources, you have to travel to Lusaka. Everyone should have a sense of comfort that within their province, there are some resources that will be earmarked that will directly come. If they've got 10 members of parliament, they should know that each member of parliament will receive 25 million multiplied by 10. That would be quite a lot of money, maybe 2.5 billion or something that would allow them to then get to undertake development initiatives. And they should also know that the quickness in terms of implementation is highly dependent on the leadership within the province. Where they face deficits, those are the opportunities that we should now create to employ young people who are trained, professional accountants, professional M&E officers. They should be employed by the local authorities so that ultimately they can take care of those accountability issues.
But economically, which areas do you think will improve due to the upward adjustment over the CDF?
There are a lot of activities that are likely to improve. One, we are likely to see a stimulation of economic activities in the rural areas. This is because there's an opportunity for young people and women to also apply for resources that they can use for business. That in itself is cheap finance that can lead to people having access to some resources that they can use within their area. The payment periods are quite flexible. It also allows people to work for themselves. It reduces the dependence also on the part of government. We are also likely to see a situation where social service or service delivery might be improved, in the sense that if you had challenges in terms of having a mortuary, you have got direct resources. You don't always have to wait for the government to allocate resources and then implement at their pace. Once your project is approved, the approvals are done, it gives you a chance to quickly start the actual implementation. That in itself might have an additional benefit in terms of improving the quality of life for our people. Our wish is that actually if CDF can be increased further, but just improve in terms of the actual controls, do some reforms that can lead to decentralization, then we'll have people that are empowered. Even you, Mr. Soko, or myself, who feel encouraged to go back to Chisamba, who feel encouraged to go back to places like Rufonsa, because we have an idea that the knowledge that we've gained in Lusaka, the schools that we've attended, we can go and put in a proposal, and from that proposal, we can have some resources to engage in some business that would create jobs in those communities and so forth.
Well, now, but what are the implications of decentralization that are now compared to years before? We understand that this issue has been with us in the past, but in the past we did not see any trickle down of resources. Even as we have been talking about the decentralization, I recall that under the PF we had a relaunch of the decentralization process, and now we are seeing this other aspect under the United Party for National Development Administration, where resources are now going to the locals, to the communities. Just your analysis regarding some of the implication of the decentralization, comparing the two administration.
Well, Zambia happens to be one of the countries on the continent that has very progressive policies. The challenge we have had for a long time has been around implementation. So we are quick in terms of identifying challenges, quick in terms of developing policy frameworks that can lead us to a certain end. But when it comes to actual implementation, it has been very problematic. Look at the development plans. We've had the 6th National Development Plan, the 7th National Development Plan. Now we're speaking of the 8th National Development Plan. If you remember very well, Mr. Soko, at the launch of the 8th National Development Plan, the current president was indicating that while there were a lot of progressive ideas within the plan, only a few of them got to be implemented, largely due to challenges related to resources and so forth. And sometimes resources can be there, but you deviate from what you had initially planned to doing other things. So it applies equally to the issue around decentralization. We have a policy on decentralization that has been in existence for a long time, but we have taken too long to actualize some of the commitments that we are making through that policy. And even as we are talking about CDF, it should not be mistaken for decentralization as though we have achieved what we had set out for. There's still a lot that we need to do. And one of the concerns we keep raising from the Center for Trade Policy and Development is that the raising of CDF from 1.6 to 25 million was a policy decision that was undertaken by the new administration, and there's a possibility that getting into 2023 they can decide to vary the figures and come down to 10 million. You've got no basis under which you query them, because it's not like a constitutional provision. It's not like provided in an act to say they'll be providing this percentage of the budget, it would be going back to the community. This then speaks to the need for us to have stronger laws or legislation that protects resources of that kind to an extent that every time the Ministry of Finance is budgeting, they should actually know that if they're budgeting for a budget that would be around 200 billion, 30 or 40% is directly going to go towards the constituency development fund, so that ultimately you have this sense of security that in the next 5 years there will be some predictable funds that will come into the communities and people can plan even for long-term projects. In that way, we'll get to actualize the aspirations related to decentralization.
But what sort of advice would you give to the communities as they submit their project proposals? What activities can they engage in and that can boost their local economies?
Well, the needs of our communities vary. In some of these communities, they're involved in agricultural activities.
Yes.
In some of these communities, they're basically just focusing on aquaculture simply because maybe they've got the perennial rivers and so forth. It would be very important for members of parliament to undertake feasibility studies in their constituencies so that ultimately they can isolate or map out in terms of key economic activities that can be undertaken in their communities. It would also be very important on the part of the central government to identify the comparative advantage that various blocks in our countries have, to an extent that if I travel to Solwezi is famously known for the beans.
The beans, yes.
Besides, of course, the minerals that are being mined. So we should aggressively work towards bringing the farmers that are growing beans, because they already have the skill. They've been doing that. It might be just an issue of scaling up their production and then teaching them ways of packaging to ensure that their products are not only for domestic consumption, but they can find themselves in the chain stores. So as they do that, it would also be very important that government, through agencies or ministries like the ministry in charge of MSMEs, they start helping our farmers or our producers by linking them to markets for their produce. Because it's another thing to scale up production simply because someone else has given you resources, but it's another conversation in terms of where you take that produce. In some of these other communities, I think maybe they might prioritize addressing challenges they are facing that are related to health provision as well as educational needs. What this might mean is that they might construct clinics, they might end up constructing facilities like classroom blocks. So it would vary in terms of what most of these constituencies would do. But it would be nice if out of this whole process we can build some level of resilience, create communities that are self-reliant, communities that are not always dependent on the farmer input support program for their survival. I think that would be good.
Interesting. That brings me to my next questions. I know you partly touched it, but looking at the aspect of the Constituency Development Fund financed projects that are community-based, are driven to bring services and facilities closer to the people, to improve social economies, living conditions, especially in reducing poverty. What factors do you think can have led to the delays in the ability of CDF to initiative to improve the lives of the local communities? While we are still doing that, but we are also seeing that there are we haven't actualized everything as intended. What could be leading to such delays?
Well, some of the delays are related to the approvals that we had spoken of a bit earlier. You know, as much as the CDF has been taken to the local constituencies, there is still a bigger part that the central government, through the Ministry of Local Government, seems to be playing when it comes to the final approval of projects that are submitted by the local communities. Those are some of the bottlenecks that we need to urgently address. And in addressing them, we might think of decentralizing powers, decentralizing offices, so that what was being approved at central government now becomes something of the past. We now get to trust the provinces. We have grown as a country. This is 50 years after independence. Some of these things and decisions can actually be undertaken from the provincial level. That's why you've got provincial ministers. That's why you've got even permanent secretaries in most of these provinces. Yes. Empower them. Let them be in a position where they can take decisions. Don't live under this notion that those that are in Lusaka are the only ones that can make proper judgments when it comes to deciding. I mean, a lot of people have gotten educated, they've left Lusaka, they are working in most of these provinces. So employ them, just give them the guidelines that they should operate under, and then you also decongest the pressure from the central government.
Interesting, Mr. Mwaipopo. Well, our dear viewers, you are watching the Ask CDF project that has been powered by the Alliance for Community Action. The program has been running here on Kame TV, and this is the 4th episode. And today we are discussing the role of civil society organization pertaining to CDF, and quite a number of issues have been addressed by our able guest, Mr. Isaac Mwaipopo, who is coming from the Center for Trade Policy and Development. In case you also want to ask Mr. Mwaipopo a question, you can do so on the number that is on your screen, as well as leave us a message on our social media platform. We'll be able to read it out. And now, proceeding further with our conversation, Mr. Mwaipopo, let's also look at the fact, what are the factors and recommendations should be considered to achieve the success of a CDF as a poverty alleviation strategy?
Well, some of the key issues that the government should urgently consider addressing, they are speaking to delays in the approval process of CDF. This has come out prominently, even in some of the reviews or meetings that have been undertaken by the central government. I think it has come out a lot that CDF funds have been dispersed to the constituencies, but activities are not happening, and the blame normally has been going to the local offices. But in actual sense, there is still some bureaucratic processes that are hindering the actual expedition of implementing activities under CDF. So government should urgently relook at the current guidelines on the Constituency Development Fund, so that getting into 2023, we can have new guidelines that are responsive to the needs of the people. Remember, everything that we are doing, even if we're dispersing resources, these are resources that are being dispersed for the good of the people. So if people are having challenges, they'll get frustrated, and ultimately you won't end up achieving the desired end. So the 2023 national budget provides a very good opportunity, as the Minister of Finance is coming through to make the 2023 national budget on Friday next week. It would be very important that part of the address will explicitly explain in terms of how they will address bottlenecks that have affected the implementation of CDF.
But is it a good idea, Mr. Mwaipopo, that up to now we're talking about resources, we are still talking about resources under the first and second quarter? Probably other constituencies haven't even utilized the second quarter, even the first quarter, and others have tended to think that the CDF is a hoax, so to say, because they're saying their funds are in the accounts. But why should funds be in the accounts as opposed to where people need to put them to use? So, but is it a good indicator, especially that we are also talking about issues of budget credibility, Mr. Mwaipopo? And you said the CTPD has been keen on that, and other civil society organizations, where these are pronouncements in the budget, but implementation. We are talking about the 2023 national budget next week, and we are still talking about resources under CDF for 2022 first quarter, second quarter,
and even for 2021.
Exactly.
In some of the constituencies. Well, I would agree that if we are to retain credibility in terms of the budget, we also need to ensure that most of the commitments that we have made commitments that we are fulfilling by ensuring that resources are being provided in a good time. Because if you delay also in terms of disbursing the funds, one of the things that you end up doing is that you put most of those local authorities and those constituencies under stress. And when they are stressed up, that's where they just look around for anything that they can do to ensure that whatever was allocated to them is finalized. And in that case, that's where you see most of these constituencies end up buying Land Cruisers or vehicles that they probably were not even urgently needed. And it would be very important that most of those things or those challenges are addressed. And key to that process is getting to trust the leadership at provincial level to run with these projects. We'll keep emphasizing this because Zambia has been independent for over 50 years now. Zambia has several universities. They've trained several people. We've got a lot of qualified accountants, and we've got a number of trained young people that are looking for jobs. So if there is need for additional manpower to ensure that the constituency development funds are utilized properly and in a timely manner, this would then be another conversation that we should have in terms of how the local authorities can further be supported to ensure that they have adequate members of staff to undertake activities. Mr. Soko, you saw during the time that government was planning to recruit enumerators for census. We had almost the entire Heroes Stadium there with young people who are looking for a short-time job of close to 3 months. So if CDF is being sent to most of these constituencies and there's inadequate manpower, it's high time that you should think of creating those opportunities so that accountants can be recruited. So that we can also have other opportunities for those that have done M&E, business administration, and they won't have to always think of Lusaka because the opportunity might be somewhere else in the outskirts of Lusaka.
Interesting. Now that you also mentioned the aspect of land cruisers, we see it as being among the provisions under the Constituency Development Fund and being an immediate need which these authorities or leaders thought of to say we should purchase vehicles immediately. And the mode of sourcing the vehicles was direct bidding. When we're looking at that, well, while an ordinary marketeer is still waiting for that for the approval that money they are seeking to get from the government to benefit from or to expand their business. But we see it as an urgent need that we get the Land Cruisers, and the Land Cruisers, the money for the Land Cruisers is instantly disbursed. But are we speaking to what the people aspire under the CDF?
Well, when it comes to procurement, from the Center for Trade Policy and Development, our appeal is that beyond even the Ministry of Local Government and other ministries, in this case we might even bring in the Ministry of Agriculture, which has equally been brought to the public, where a number of citizens are questioning the credibility of the recent procurement related to fertilizer. Our appeal is that we should not forget in terms of how procurement processes which are not transparent have taken us to. This country is highly indebted. It has had serious challenges in terms of meeting its debt obligations, largely due to the challenges related to how we're procuring for goods and services. It would be very important that we adhere to the guidelines that are provided related to procurement. That process will help to save this country a lot of resources. It will also help ensure that the resources that are being utilized are placed where they are needed the most. When it comes to the development priorities for most of the communities, decentralization will remain the key agenda. And when we're talking about decentralization, we're talking about fiscal decentralization, ensuring that decisions related to the implementation of projects are left in the hands of the provincial leadership. Try and work out modalities that ensure that once resources are disbursed, the resources that are going to be implemented in the constituencies, and the provincial leadership will take an active role in terms of approving. In case there are deficiencies and gaps, do an audit and ensure that you equip most of those institutions with the needed manpower. It will not serve any purpose to disburse a lot of resources into places where you do not have human resource to utilize those resources. You're better off even taking part of those resources, employing people and ensuring that the work is being done.
Interesting. Well, our dear viewers, you are watching the 4th episode of the Ask TV series program, and our topic of discussion is the role of civil society organizations in the management of CDF, and my guest is Mr. Isaac Mwaipopo from the Center for Trade Policy and Development, CTPD. Just now we'll take a short break. We'll be back on the other side. Stay tuned.
Did you know that you can report CDF mismanagement? Reporting abuse of CDF will ensure that CDF works for you and your community. Among the offices you can report to is the Office of the Auditor General by simply dialing 5566 toll-free on MTN and Zamtel, and to the Anti-Corruption Commission on the toll-free line 5908. For more information, visit our website www.scazambia.org/CDF. Remember, CDF is your money. Take active part in how it is used and managed. This message is brought to you by the Alliance for Community Action.
Welcome back. Well, dear viewers, you are watching The People's Verdict, and this episode is brought to you by the Alliance for Community Action under the Ask a CDF project, and we are discussing the role of civil society organizations, especially pertaining to CDF, and my guest is Mr. Isaac Mwaipopo from the CTPD, and we have discussed quite a number of issues pertaining to CDF. Now, going forward now on the program, Mr. Mwaipopo, what are some of the key areas that government needs to focus on to ensure that the success of the CDF in terms of preventing corruption, which is also key, and as witnessed especially under the previous CDF allocations, where incidents of corruption were also recorded previously. But going forward, how can we prevent corruption, especially now that the amount has been allocated is huge, and others have predicted that this may lead to a lot of, in terms of corruption levels may increase under this allocation, considering that the money that is involved is huge compared to the 1.6 that was previously allocated?
Well, some of the bottlenecks that need to be addressed might include those delays with regards to approvals, because it increases the appetite for corruption. Ultimately, you end up having resources that are sitting in the bank idle for a long time, and you have people that might have sent in their proposals or their bids waiting for them to receive resources for them to undertake development initiatives. But if they see delays, and that's how sometimes officials become quite manipulative, where they start maybe even enticing people to say no. If you give them something, probably they'll push to ensure that the project that they were bidding for goes through. So to avoid some of those things, you need to ensure that there is a transparent and expeditious process where if people apply, the timelines under which proposals are reviewed, approved is very short, and in no time people get on the ground and they begin to work. That is the only way that we're going to create multiple benefits, because if I receive a down payment for me to go and construct a classroom, I'll then go back into the community to look for someone that can, where I can buy blocks. I'll go back to look for a place where I can buy hardware-related materials. And in that way, those resources end up going to citizens that are engaged in productive activities, such as the supplying of blocks and so forth. You end up having a situation of looking for 2 or 3 people that can assist you under the construction of that classroom, and that is how jobs can be created. I think the other issue is on the role of the Anti-Corruption Commission.
Exactly.
It is encouraging that some efforts are now being made in terms of ensuring that there's a lot of advertising on how one can reach out to the Anti-Corruption Commission. More recently, we saw an advert where they're recruiting more staff that can be doing investigations. That in itself is inspiring some public confidence that beyond just the complaints, there are some efforts that are being made to address some of the constraints that have been affecting institutions, law enforcement agencies like the Anti-Corruption Commission, Drug Enforcement Commission. And if we can also get to decentralize some of those offices to an extent that even in the provincial centers their presence can be felt, then we'll have a situation where citizens are afraid to engage in corrupt activities to an extent that they would know that the consequences might impact negatively on their own life.
Yeah, interesting. Well, sometimes it is difficult to distinguish between corrupt activities and bad decisions from the honest incompetence or lack of other technical capacities, especially in such areas as procurement. How can the known vulnerabilities and capacity gaps of key stakeholders such as WDCs, CDF, and local councils can be addressed?
Well, it begins with orientations and trainings. Of course, members of the ward development committees are drawn from the community. Their levels of education, their levels of exposure varies. But even as that varies, you would agree that we should also get to undertake some due diligence that gets to ensure that the people that are forming these development committees are people that are credible. They are people that possess integrity. They are people that the communities look up to and trust to a certain extent. Beyond that is the need to sensitize them, get to explain in terms of what corruption is, in terms of the various forms of corruption, and it shouldn't be a one-off. These are sensitization activities that should be done time and again. It would help to improve the levels of awareness and the gravity of responsibility that lays in the ward development committees, because I agree in terms of your observation that the corruption can actually begin from that same lower base or lower decision making, and ultimately it is just going through all the way up to the end, and that's where you find that people develop also some level of interest in a particular project to some extent, that they work around ensuring that they know who is influential in the next group, so that they can push an agenda that when they are reviewing potential projects, their projects are looked at favorably.
Yeah, we also look, you partly mentioned the highly involvement of the minister and the members of parliament. When we look at the minister and the members of parliament, others are actually playing double roles, where they are ministers, they are also a member of parliament of a constituency. And also let's look at the aspect of the members of parliament. Under the constituency, the Ward Development Committee or the CDF committee, they have the right to nominate 3 members. And don't you think that also, and others may be using it to influence what they think is immediately, especially of their political interest?
Well, I tend to think of members of parliament as leaders that had made certain promises to their constituents, and it's on that basis that they were elected into public office. So if there are resources that are coming through to that constituents, I have no reservations or challenges in terms of them having a say, because those are publicly elected officials on the basis that the same community has got confidence and trust in their ability to lead them. So their participation is critical, and it is actually needed, because they are ultimately the same people that come through to the National Assembly and speak on behalf of the people. Part of the allocations or the increased allocation can equally be attributed to the lobbying that some of the members of parliament have done over the years. So if they've done some lobbying, it's as a result of them identifying that the needs of their communities actually were exceeding what was being allocated to their constituencies.
Interesting. Now, currently we do not have the access to information law, which makes it difficult for the public to request the information regarding CDF. And do you think the government is fighting corruption the right way without allowing people to access public information? What do you recommend on this aspect? Because even us as journalists, we sometimes we have limitations to find out from authorities to say what is happening here. What about this irregularity? What about this? So, but what is your recommendation on this aspect?
Well, from the Center for Trade Policy and Development, we find it quite sad that there seems to be some inertia on the part of government in terms of providing a clear roadmap with regards to the enactment of the Access to Information law. We remain a part of the civil society organizations that think that the access to information would be critical not only to the civil society organizations or the media, but we think that it would also help the general citizens to walk into an office and request for information that can be helpful to them. Remember, most of the public officials that we have in various positions, there are officials that were elected by the people. It's only a handful of those that were appointed by some of the officials that we directly participated in giving a mandate. So if they are enjoying a mandate that was given to them by the people, it is also very critical that they should be open to providing more information that can allow the people to question, the people to know what they are involved in, so that ultimately we can have an open society, a society that thrives on transparency and accountability. Of course, even as we push for the access to information law, it's not a guarantee that all the information that we need will be provided, but it gives us at least a starting point in terms of demanding for some information.
Interesting. But how important is stakeholder collaboration or cooperation, especially in the implementation of the Constituency Development Fund, CDF, to achieve its purpose?
Well, the stakeholder collaboration is very critical in the sense that some of the constituencies might not be in a position to meet all their development aspirations despite receiving monies through CDF. And sometimes in most of these constituencies, you also find that there are weaker systems with regards to transparency and accountability, and resources that are meant to benefit the public can easily be mistaken to be resources that are meant to benefit their members of parliament or the local authorities. So having multi-stakeholders or a number of stakeholders involved, it helps to enhance chances for improved accountability and transparency in the way programs such as CDF are being implemented.
Going forward, we are looking at the formulation of the 2022 national budget. Should government continue with the increased allocation under CDF, or scale down, or what would you recommend as CTPD?
Well, a recommendation from the Center for Trade Policy and Development is that government should actually consider maintaining the allocation towards CDF. If they can even afford to increase, even better. This is because we consider CDF to be a viable tool towards addressing the existing inequalities in our society. It gives a voice to the community. It gives them an opportunity to decide their destiny.
Why should citizens on the grassroots level take an interest and participate in CDF projects and get involved in issues pertaining to accountability, transparency, and just a general concern on the utilization of CDF resources?
Because it's their money. The Constituency Development Fund is accumulation of taxes that have been paid by Mr. Soko and Mr. Mwepopo. So from those resources, government has decided to bring back some of those resources in our community. So we need to take a keen interest to ensure that our money is being put to good use. And when we demonstrate that our money is being put to good use, we should go back to all those that we have elected into public offices and give them as an example to say, you've seen from the 25 million that you had allocated to our constituents, this is what we've been able to do. We are now requesting that you should add more resources so that each constituency can start receiving 50 million or receiving 40 million. And ultimately, we will stop depending on the central government. We will build systems that will help our local communities to thrive and become more resilient. We will have jobs within our locations. We will have shops that will spring up. We won't have to all go to Lusaka to go and buy things. Most of the things will be coming within our location because they'll become conducive communities to live in.
Looking at, you are a key stakeholders who look at these issues pertaining to the policies and the budget, pertaining to the budget as a whole. How important is the civil society organization, especially when it comes to budget tracking, and how are you positioning yourself, especially to track how this budget has performed, especially pertaining to the issue of CDF?
Well, we have already started undertaking a process of just trying to understand how much has been allocated towards CDF, and then also just trying to do some tracking in terms of how much has been disbursed. We've been monitoring some of the reports that have been coming through from government, through the Secretary to Treasury, but we've also been working closely with some of the communities where CDF is being implemented to just ensure that where we see delays related to disbursements, we urge government. Where we see that resources have been disbursed but projects are delaying to take off, we try to push that those constituencies should step up.
I understand that under the CDF, Mr. Mwepopo, like for instance, a big province like Lusaka, district like Lusaka, for instance, the Lusaka City Council has to supervise all these constituencies. Now, we had a model of coming up with mini civic centers to ensure that we work on aspect of decentralization and people at constituency level attend to their development needs. But we still see such interventions not coming to fruition. But how can we urgently work on such matters as a country to ensure that even as we can lessen the burden, for instance, on the part of implementing authorities like the Lusaka City Council, in the case of Lusaka, where they have to supervise all these provinces. At the end of the day, they have to supervise them. But how can we try to actualize this concept where we are trying to decentralize our resources? We make sure that also such other programs also go to the constituencies.
Well, it would be very critical. You know, the aspect of just lumping everything on yourself, especially the central government, is something that takes away the space and time from our leaders to think, plan ahead, and look for other opportunities that they can bring into the space in terms of supporting our communities that are in need of development. You've watched Parliament, you've seen that the number of ministers struggle to actually find themselves in Parliament to answer questions that other members of Parliament can have.
Yes.
Partly it can be attributed to this whole process of lumping a lot of work on themselves, ensuring that maybe working in a manner that pushes almost all the weight on themselves. So if we decentralize and begin to build systems in our provincial ministries, in our provinces, or easy the burden on the part of the central government, they can be doing the policy processes and ensure that if resources are coming through, they go to the actual provinces for implementation.
Your concluding remarks, Mr. Maibu.
Well, our appeal from the Center for Trade Policy and Development, especially as the Minister of Finance will be presenting the 2023 national budget, we expect to see clear policy direction that is speaking to reforms that can be undertaken to improve the implementation of CDF. We would like to end by indicating that the Constituency Development Fund is actually a brilliant initiative that was developed in this country, of course, learning from other countries. And also the scaling up in terms of resources towards CDF is welcome, and our expectation is that we maintain what we have provided, and where we can increase the resources, but also just move in to ensure that we provide a lot more support to ensure that there's expeditious spending related to CDF, and communities can be transformed through that.
Interesting. Thank you very much for finding time to be with us today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Soko.
We appreciate it. And our dear viewers, we've come to the end of this episode of The People's Verdict. And this program was brought to you by the Alliance for Community Action under the Ask CDF TV series. And this was the 4th episode. We've been discussing matters pertaining to the Constituency Development Fund, CDF. My guest for today has been Isaac Mwaipopo, the Center for Trade Policy and Development Executive Director, and we have been discussing the role of civil society organizations in the management of the Constituency Development Fund, CDF. Until next week when we come with another interesting episode of The People's Verdict, remember, Camera TV is not just another channel.